Hi guys, nice to see some new faces, and I'm looking forward to having a bit of a chat. Toad's back from overseas. We'll have a barbie afterwards, and there are a bunch of awesome people in here that you're going to want to meet, new folks you might not know. We've been giving these sort of presentations maybe for the last nearly 18 months, I guess. ChatGPT launched in November 2022. What are we now? Yeah, we're nearly 18 months into it. And I'm pleased to say that the Hub has birthed a few AI companies through that period. We've got Kieran here from Springboards, which is I would say, true Hub born and bred AI company that has kicked some fantastic goals over the last 8 months since Pip and Amy kicked the company off, and are on the verge of closing a very exciting funding round that really puts them in an amazing position. And the reason I sort of draw attention to that is this concept of upstream. So, I mean, you wouldn't be here if you weren't thinking along the same lines, but I just know that there are lots of conversations like this going on around the world right now, where there are people thinking about building stuff in a whole new way that that you're either upstream of or you're downstream of. Let's just put it that way. Take, for example, Springboards. So what Springboards is what, Kieran, why don't you tell us what Springboards is, just as an example?
Yeah, I call it a structured ideation tool for marketing and creative agencies. But in particular, it's an AI tool that takes a very small amount of input, particularly around branding, and kind of builds on outputs over a set of structured games called Springboards to sort of take you all the way from the name of a brand through to sort of like concept art, as well as like campaigns and things like that in about 10 minutes.
So it's knocking people's socks off, because it's a tool that effectively does the work of 10 people. And the idea is that by introducing it into a marketing brand agency, the insights that the founders have is that brand and marketing agencies just spend a huge amount of resource and money on pitching for work that they never win. So it's this huge sunk cost that really has no return on the investment. So therefore, if you can reduce the cost of pitching, you can improve the margin for those businesses. And that's what the Springboards platform does. It's, if you like, a co-pilot for agency side creatives. And I talk about that because there are just many tens of thousands probably of entrepreneurs thinking right now about creating co-pilots for every aspect of business. We're going to be talking about one of them today, which is customer service. And I feel like 18 months into the whole ChatGPT revolution, we're really starting to see things that give us hard data that this is starting to impact business in a massive, massive way. And then I think we're not seeing the quiet stuff that's going on in just about every organization, where there are teams of people figuring out how do we do this better, cheaper, faster. So anyway, what I want for all of you, what I want for all of us, what I want for our kids, our friends, our businesses, our partners, and ourselves is to stay upstream of AI, because I kind of have the feeling that if we don't do that and we're downstream of it, AI happens to us, as opposed to being the ones that build stuff and create stuff and so forth. Suddenly we find ourselves on the receiving end of technological unemployment. This is not where you want to be. So we want to stay upstream. A horrible analogy for this is, if someone's taking a pee in the river, you kind of want to be upstream of it, not downstream of it. So that's the reason for upstream. And this will be a series that we do. There's a lot of awesome folks in the room here that are experts. Ian Hansel in the corner over there is an expert on one of the topics that we're going to be talking about today, called RAG, which is where we take an LLM, and instead of just sort of asking it to come up with answers, we ask it to come up with answers that are based in fact by giving it documents. Ian's an expert on that. we've got Aaron Blackman at the back, who built, scaled, and exited Retail Express last year, and is now building a super exciting AI company as well. So there are lots of people that we'll draw on for this Upstream series. And the idea is, how do we just level up? How do we all level our skills up, our knowledge up, etc.? So I wanted to my objectives is set the burning platform, cover some key concepts, and then my promise to you was that we walk out of here with the sort of 0.1 version of a customer service bot. I say 0.1 because I really just want to kind of like introduce you to that platform, get you going, have you understand the concepts. But then there's going to be a lot of tinkering you're going to want to go and do with that to get it really working well for you. So I explained why Upstream. This is the thing that really kind of convinced me that, you know, we need to be doing even more than what we have been doing. And man, we built a thing, called it the AI Lab. We've been running AI talks here just about every week, and I still feel like we're not doing enough. You know, we really need to be doing more in this space. This is a company called Klarna. Anyone know about Klarna? Fintech company. Aaron, give us like 10 seconds on what Klarna does.
Afterpay, buy now, pay later, essentially for the US, one of the biggest players. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're really, really large. And one of their biggest costs is customer service. You can imagine, you know, it's a consumer-facing thing. Just look at these stats. I think they bear, you know, internalizing. I think this was a 3-month trial that they did, either 1 or a 3-month trial that they did. So the AI assistant, the customer service platform, which we're going to kind of build today, it handled 2/3 of their customer service chats. It's doing the equivalent work of 700 full-time agents. Was on par with human agents with respect to customer satisfaction score. More accurate in terms of error resolution, leading to a 25% drop in repeat inquiries. Customers resolve their errands in less than 2 minutes compared to 11 minutes previously. I mean, all of us that have been on the end of customer service, that's just like, you know, manna from heaven. Available in 23 markets, 24/7 in 35 languages. Estimated to have driven a $40 million USD profit improvement. Now, that's just straight to the bottom line. That's a super compelling small case study, and I just think that is happening quietly all over the place. And we need to be prepared for it. I didn't have time to put it in here, but the other big news over the last couple of months, massive layoffs at McKinsey. You would kind of think that the tech digital sector is sort of going through a bit of a challenging period because there's still a lot of layoffs. There are, but I just have a feeling that those jobs are not coming back, you know, because I think we're building these companies differently. I mean, Aaron, you must be thinking about building your new company in a totally different way to what you built Retail Express, right? Like the meme in Silicon Valley is, can we build $1 billion company with like 10 employees? In other words, how do we use AI to give us this massive leverage effect where we're not just like, you know, having to employ hundreds of people and get those enormous organizations? So anyway, that's the burning platform. How do we stay upstream? I'm just going to encourage everyone to just keep building your skills, experiment, share stuff like this. Just keep building stuff. It's the only way to really stay ahead. And today we're going to focus on one small area, but hopefully you'll use that to kind of experiment with lots of different things. And then suddenly you can find yourself helping others and you know, creating opportunities that way. So why now? You know, if I think about probably the sort of 4 stages that we've done these kind of talks in, the reason right now, because I feel like, does everyone feel like there's a bit of a ChatGPT plateau over the last 6 months? You sort of, you know, a lot of early excitement and then sort of just like plateau, you know, nothing really all that exciting. But the reality is that these things have got better, cheaper, and faster. ChatGPT 4.5, which they keep improving quietly in the background, is much better than 4 and certainly a hell of a lot better than 3.5. You know, I have a larger context window. Does anyone want to know what a context window is? It's quite an important concept. So a context window is basically, you can think of it as the working memory of the chatbot. You'll remember you work with ChatGPT and you sort of get a long way into a conversation and it's forgotten what you talked about earlier in the conversation. And that's because each message that you send to ChatGPT is being fed back into the prompt each time so that it's kind of remembering what was said before. And obviously at some point in time, that uses up all of the prompt space and there's nothing left for it. So it starts to get rid of the stuff at the beginning of the prompt, and therefore it's forgotten what you talked about right at the beginning. Now, we've grown the context windows of these things, which means that you can now have these long-ranging conversations for hours or days, and it remembers what was spoken about earlier on. And certainly if you're building apps with the GPT APIs, you have now 128,000 tokens, which is the equivalent of 3 novels. You can put 3 of the Great Gatsbys, literally paste the full content of the 3 Gatsbys into a single prompt. Or let's say you could put 3 full novels into a prompt, send it to ChatGPT and say, please give me please create a new novel off the back of these 3 that, you know, weave this cinematic universe together, a new one that is based on these 3 things. So context window is huge. Coming down in price due to competition. The last time we talked about this, it was only really OpenAI. You now have Claude, you now have Grok, you now have Cohere. It's a radically different and competitive space. And that's great news because, you know, it's cheaper to use this stuff, and then it's faster. This, I think, is a very important place to start as a reminder of how these things work and why prompting is important. Is at the end of the day, what is a large language model? It's basically a piece of software that has this very clever ability to predict accurately what the next token in a series of tokens should be, or one can think of it as the next word in a series of words. Best illustrated here, where let's call this the sort of starting stem, a number of potential words that could be the next word here, and an algorithm that looks at which is the highest percentage next token that I should put into the sequence of tokens. That's basically what these things do. They do it incredibly cleverly because we've trained them on the sum total of human knowledge. But the reason that this is important to call out is it explains why prompting is important. Because it can only make a good prediction for the next thing here if what came before it allows it to predict accurately what the next thing should be. So that's why prompting is still a bit of a dark art and something that it's good to become good at, because the better you get at this, the better it's able to predict the things that you want to come out the other end. Does that make sense? So next token prediction, that's what prompting is all about. That's what LLMs basically do. And prompting that's still the most important part of the whole thing from our perspective. The big move that I think sort of big picture, what's going on, you know, in 2024, April versus, you know, when we might have been talking about this 6 months ago, is the move from sort of having chatbots that type stuff out for us that we copy and paste into documents and so forth to this world of agents where things actually do valuable work for us that save us time and save us money. So for example, a customer service agent is something that we can sort of set and forget that is going to handle the customer service of people landing on our website. That's different to just having a chatbot that you type questions and gives you answers, because this agent might do things like answer the question, but then email the team to say, I've had a conversation with such and such a user on the website, you need to follow up with them. Or it might connect into our CRM and update some data that it's collected from the user who's landed on the website. So that's a key distinction here in terms of this move from sort of simple chatbots to moving to something which is an agent. In my language, an agent is something that has autonomy, meaning it's able to sort of operate independently, and it has agency, meaning it has tools, it can perform tasks. So that's the sort of big picture piece. The next sort of concept to wrap our heads around is semantic search. Semantic search is sort of fundamentally distinct from keyword search, which we've been used to with Google all of these years. Type in word, get responses, search results, where that keyword has a high match with the content. Semantic search really is about intent and meaning, which means that I might land on the Digital Hub website and ask about something that doesn't appear anywhere on the website's content, but conceptually is talked about on the website. Let's think about it. It might be something like, we talk about cadetship programs for young kids that we run here at the hub during the school holidays, let's say, or during term time. Someone might come onto the website and say, typically a website search, they might say courses for youngsters, let's say. And if we didn't have somewhere in our text courses for youngsters, that search would have turned up with a zip, you know, even though we have a whole section on the website which talks about holiday programs and cadetships and so forth. Does that make sense? Conceptually, courses for youngsters is the same thing as holiday workshops for kids. But in a world of sort of keyword search, one would return 0, whereas a world of semantic search, the other would return proper results. Does that make sense? I mean, this is basic stuff, but I think useful to understand. And a customer service chatbot obviously needs to use semantic search rather than keyword search, because we want it to be able to answer questions that customers have that we may not specifically have in our data set very specific words that match that, but conceptually we can answer that question because we understand what their intent and their meaning is. And then we get into a little bit of sort of getting into the weeds here, but I think this is useful to understand. And you guys are all above sort of 75 IQ, so I think we should be able to basically wrap our heads around this. And I might have to call on Ian to better explain it than I can. But here is the concept of tokens and vectors. So you know how I showed earlier in this picture here where we had this sort of predicting the word. It isn't really predicting the word, it's actually predicting a vector or a series of numbers here that represent a word. Because you can't do maths on the words, but you can do maths on the numbers. So what does that mean? It means that words can be encapsulated as numbers or vectors in a semantic space. So what it means is that we're able to look at two words and compute using an algorithm their relationship within a sort of three-dimensional space. So for example, the words, imagine this as a sort of 3D cube, and we had all of the English words sort of plotted out in it in a three-dimensional space. One would find the words queen and king quite closely positioned in that semantic space because there's a relationship. They're both in the sort of royalty space, let's say. We would find, so that's kind of, you know, an example of male-female relationships. Here's an example of tenses where you have present tense, past tense, and that those words would be found close within that sort of semantic space. And what it allows us to do is to perform mathematics to figure out, okay, given this input token or this input number and this potential series of other numbers that you could choose from, which one is the closest in semantic space in terms of its numeric value? Kieran, am I roughly on the right path here?
Yeah, you are.
What that allows us to do is something that you could never do with just basic language. You could never ask basic language. You couldn't perform a computation on basic language, normal sort of text language like this, where you say brother minus boy plus girl equals sister. But you can do it once you've turned those words into numbers, and those numbers have a representation in 3D space. I know I'm not explaining this extremely well, but just conceptually, we've taken words, turned them into numbers, and they have a relationship with each other that allow you to then perform maths on them. Ian, is there anything you'd add to that explanation?
No, I think that's it. And it's like the maths is that. It's like distance, proximity, how close things are to each other, and then you expand that from words to paragraphs to documents, and it's the same idea with more text. And yeah.
So I'm not going to speak too much. Sorry?
You've brought this up before.
Yeah.
And now I understand a lot better.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot closer.
I think this notion of being able to perform mathematical, perform equations basically on words is the sort of unlock. Obviously, you couldn't do it if you just passed pass those words into an algorithm, but if they were numbers, that number minus that number plus that number would equal that number. Then it sort of starts to make sense. So how do you turn these words into numbers? Here's how you do it. So this is just an example from one of my little projects where I've taken the sort of regular language, if you like, the words, and I've used an API that OpenAI offers, which is their Embeddings API. And these are basically the embeddings or the vectors. So these numbers here represent these words. Okay? Now, why is that important? If I can take those words and turn them into an array of numbers like this, it means that if somebody came to perform a search, I would take their search query, I would turn it into a series of numbers, and then I would run a mathematical calculation to see in this series of numbers, or in the many of, imagine I have many of these in my database, the query gets converted into numbers, and I'm then able to perform a mathematical comparison to say, which of the records in my database best matches this query mathematically. Does that make sense? So if we take the query and we convert it into numbers using the same rules that we turned that into numbers, now we can perform a mathematical query between a mathematical calculation between the query and the data that we have in the database. Yeah, Tina.
Maybe a silly question, but
Tina, former lead of data science and machine learning at JP Morgan. I mean, come on, you should be giving this.
I should know the answer to this question.
Yeah.
However, is it a universal library that does the comparison of the words to the numbers, or is it unique to the model?
Yeah, the actual math is sort of like, it's called k-nearest neighbors. And there are different algorithms one can use for doing the actual sort of mathematical test of take these numbers, look at this large lot of numbers and find me k-nearest neighbors, meaning k is like I want the top 10 or I want the top 20 or I want the top 30. So that's k. And then the nearness would be the result of the calculation. So let's just say, what these are basically quotes from books that I have in my database here. Each one has a numerical representation or vectors. My input query might be something like, take me to, or answer my question about X. That question would be turned into a series of numbers. It will then perform, a relatively basic mathematical comparison to say, what are the nearest neighbors of those records? Return me the top 6 in order of proximity. So in other words, it's going to give me the 6 records that it thinks are most closely matching my input query.
So with the step before, just the step before. So does book have the same number across all models that you run? So even before you do the query in the next closest to, does book as a word in the English language have a particular number that is universal across all models, or is it unique to the model?
No, it doesn't, because book in that context is, I think the right answer is that book isn't really just one number in this thing here. We couldn't go and say, that's book over there. Book has multiple numbers in here with respect to its context within this content here.
Got it.
Is that right, Kieran?
Yeah, I think
So we couldn't go and say, that's the book, of those. There are many more of these than there are words up here. So if we actually took that and we got the embeddings for them, this list here is many, many more than just those numbers here, because one needs to represent the word managers in multiple different ways, not just in one way. Does that make sense? Anything to add to that, Kieran?
Yeah, I think you can think of, so these values down the bottom here, you can think of that as like coordinates in a high dimensional space. So we normally think of coordinates in like 3D space or 2D space, and that's why that diagram that we showed before was in 2D and 3D, because it's hard to think about high dimensional spaces. But if you go back to the next page, this is the coordinates, these value numbers. That's the coordinates in a very high dimensional space. And we can do the same kinds of maths that we can with 2D spaces. How far apart are these things? How, whatever. So this is a coordinates for the word book, for instance, in this space that's not relevant to anything outside of this model, but you might say that book and novel, they're going to be mapped to similar spaces. The distance between those spaces is going to be close, and that is meaningful for various things that we might want to do.
Sorry. So the values, you mentioned that the word book might have different numerical values and occupy these spaces. But are the contexts of, so there's multiple contexts of the word book, but are those values universal?
Are the values universal?
Yeah.
I think the number, look, I'm getting a little over my skis there, but I would say my understanding is that there isn't it's not like a unique ID for the word that you could go and say, oh, this is a unique ID for the word. If you went and looked in some other thing, you would find the word book is represented by that number over here. I don't think that's how it works. Yeah? Yeah, Nick?
On that sort of thing. So say you've got the word king and queen, and do they exist in multiple vector spaces, which comes up with how it's put into that representation in the answer, or how is that dealt with?
Yeah, so this process of taking the words and turning them into numbers is a process called embedding. And one can think of that as an algorithm that there might be many flavors of. In fact, now you've got OpenAI have their own flavor of embedding model. You've got Cohere that has their own flavor of embedding model. It's the invention of these LLMs and the whole technology underneath, which is allowing us to even do this, of take those words and capture them so that their semantic meaning can be retained in numbers. So from one provider to another, these things are different. But what's important is that we use the same algorithm to encode the query as we do that we've encoded the data.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So there are many different providers of these things. But if you use the different algorithm here for the query, the numbers just aren't going to match. Yeah. So as long as we use the same on both ends, we're okay. So I know that was geeky, but it's kind of useful to understand what's going on under the hood here. So we're not just like, anyway, so move on from the math, because I felt...
People who are building these AI companies, I mean, are you using like ChatGPT or these existing models to underpin what you do, or are you creating this yourself?
Yeah, so
thank you.
For us specifically, we're using a set of model providers, but broadly speaking, the kind of scale and the computational costs to create a model like this from scratch is no longer within the realm of any small company. So this is why people are starting to talk about foundation models, which is like very big, very well-funded companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars creating a model, and they sell it to smaller companies that can't afford to do that as a foundation of doing other things, primarily through prompting, maybe with a bit of fine-tuning.
Okay, so they're basically, none of this is open source. It's all...
Some models are open source.
Actually, that's the big and exciting thing that's happening right now. Up until this point, really, up until a few months ago, OpenAI pretty much had a lock on the whole market. They're the 1,000-pound gorilla, 50% owned by Microsoft, and they pretty much, that Klarna example I gave before, that's Klarna building on OpenAI's APIs. So building a customer service bot off the back of OpenAI's APIs. In the same way that we might build something off the back of HubSpot's APIs or whatever it is. I think cloud-based platform, we want to build an app. We don't want to go and spend billions of dollars building that cloud-based platform, but we want to leverage off of its capabilities. They offer an API. It costs us X per month. Every call we make costs a fraction of a cent, and we get to use that intelligence in the cloud, basically. We're not going to go and create that for ourselves. But now what's happening, which is a super exciting, and another reason for having this talk right now, is that enter stage left, Mark Zuckerberg, Meta, Facebook, last week released a model called Llama, fully open source and self-hostable. In fact, if we had time, I would show you it running on my computer. So a version of that, which is at GPT 3.5 quality, which is pretty bloody good, can now run on a MacBook locally, meaning you're not paying, it's just running on your computer. You could leave it overnight writing a novel, or whatever you want it to do. So that's a huge game changer by open sourcing that with a very permissive license, meaning that unless you're one of the top 7 FANG companies, pretty much anyone can use that commercially to build products and services and so on. And then what companies like Springboards are doing is, rather than training that model from scratch, you can fine tune it with a relatively small amount of compute by giving it your own data set and saying, let's say in your world, Greg's got a software company that helps in the NDIS space. Let's take 10 years of your company's operating activity. You could create a really proprietary data set to your business. It might be questions from NDIS users and answers from NDIS providers. And that data set you could now use to create a fine-tuned version of this open source model that is highly proprietary to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that you would be able to self-host. You could put it on AWS, you could put it on Azure, and now you're not even using OpenAI or any of these other guys. You've got your own proprietary model. So that's a massive new thing that's now possible. And I'm sure Aaron would be thinking in his company, how do we create highly proprietary stuff that no one else has access to? Right now, everyone has access to OpenAI, and we all get what OpenAI provides. But how do we kind of get a bit of an edge over the guy next door?
Hosting's a big one, just on, for cybersecurity and that sort of thing.
Well, that's right. That's right. One of the things that's held things up until now, from an enterprise perspective, is a lot of enterprises weren't all that keen to be throwing their queries and their data across to OpenAI. There's questions about, are they using this to train their models, blah, 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 blah. So anyway.
Chris, sorry, before you move on. So embeddings, we don't need to understand the numbers or any of that, right? We just need, understand the concept.
Yeah.
And the way this is going to be relevant for most of our cases is more likely only if you want to fine tune the model, and because you need to create the embeddings.
Yeah.
And then that's.
Well, not fine tune the model. So this is where it makes sense to get into the weeds of this conversation that, and maybe let's go to a chatbot that uses this. So let's go to the Hub website where I have created a chatbot, and this is what we're going to do in the second half of this conversation. We're all going to build one. But if this chatbot didn't have an underlying data set that it was able to answer from, it would just be hallucinating its answers. If you just put it in there, maybe with a prompt and said, your job is to help people come to the digital hub, you'd be relying on the training information, and the cutoff was, halfway through last year, let's say, that somewhere along the line, the spider that scraped the web had scraped the digital hub website, information would be 18 months old, and it would have a crack at answering the question, but you could never trust the answers. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to say to it, be helpful, use your amazing language abilities to answer the questions, but all of the questions must be answered from this data set. You may not cook shit up, you have to answer from this information. And that process is called RAG. RAG means, I'll get to use my pen here. Let's see if this will work. So RAG, very important concept to understand. RAG means Retrieval-Augmented generation. Now, the retrieval part means retrieve information from a data set. So actual data. We are augmenting, meaning rather than just relying on the generation, which is what ChatGPT, it's a generative AI, right? It generates tokens or generates words or generates pictures or whatever. Rather than just purely relying on the generation, which think of this just as ChatGPT, we're saying we want to augment that with information or data that is retrieved from a reliable data system. So this concept of RAG is a really, really important thing to understand. So not just ChatGPT, we want to augment what ChatGPT does because it's amazing. It writes perfect English, never makes a typo. if you prompt it correctly, can answer in incredibly compelling ways. But we don't want it to just hallucinate and make stuff up. We want it to actually use the data that we provide. And that's what RAG is about. And basically, we're now at the RAG stage of the stuff. We're all like, the chatbot stuff was cool, but now this is about how do we take data that we have in whatever business we're building or business that we have, and how do we tap into that? How do we use the AI capabilities, but tap into this, the real data sources that we have? Does that make sense? Okay, so then how does that work? So it works like this. Let's imagine we have a prompt, and the prompt is the usual sort of preamble. You are a helpful customer service agent for, let's say, for Springboards. Okay, Kieran's business. Your job is to blah, 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 blah. You must only answer from the information that I provide you. You must always be friendly and helpful, but you must always be factual. And when you answer a question, you must always follow it up with a suggested next question that someone might be interested in, okay? So that's the prompt engineering part of this that we've all got to get good at, because if we want to get good, remember what I showed you the thing, if it's going to predict a good token, you want to give it good stuff at the beginning to predict the next good token. Now, at the bottom here, it will say, you may only answer the information from the content, okay? And then at the bottom of this prompt will literally be a heading called content and some squiggly brackets, content, squiggly brackets. So this is our prompt template, okay? Now what's going to happen is, let's go to our website where there is a chatbot. Someone's going to type in here, let's go to the Digital Hub. We've got a Springboards example. It might say, how does Springboards pricing work? Okay. We don't want ChatGPT to basically just answer and come up with some garbage about what the Springboards pricing model is, because it doesn't know. It's just going to always, as ChatGPT refuses to, it doesn't ever refuse to answer a question. It ad-libs, it'll come up with something, right? So if we feed it this prompt template, that's the sort of step one. But now what we need to do is we need to what's called stuff the prompt with actual information that it's going to use to answer this question. So what happens here is, this is where the vector search happens. We take this query, we convert it to an embedding. In other words, those numbers that you saw. We already have our data set sitting over here where Kieran and the team have basically taken, let's just start with all the website pages that they have, which is what we're going to do when we start building this. Or they've got a document, they've got PDFs, whatever their data source is. They've got a series of records, and each record has those, it has the text, but then it also has the vectors that represent this record in terms of its numeric data. Does that make sense? So what we're doing is, the question comes in, we take the question, we convert it to a series of embeddings, we run the k nearest neighbors query. What that does is it goes into the data set. This might have thousands of records of information that the Springboards team have put in. It says that the best matching record is record number 4 and record number 75. It takes that content, sticks it at the bottom of this prompt, and passes that to ChatGPT. So now what that says is, I forgot to put a thing in here, which is user's question. So it would say, you're a helpful agent for Springboards. Your job is to blah, 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 to answer the user's question. Their question is blah. So we would take the question that came from there, the actual text of the question, we'd put that in here. We'd run that sort of nasty vector math in the background here. We'd bring back these two records. We'd take the actual text, not the vectors, the actual text of those records, and we would stuff that into the prompt here as the content. The content here, and now suddenly what that prompt says is, you're a helpful CS agent, blah, 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 blah. You must answer the user's question. The question is, how much is the pricing to use the platform? The content that you must answer from is, you know, a section from a document that Springboards have in their Google Drive that says, our pricing works as follows, blah, 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 per seat, per year, whatever, whatever. That content goes in here. And then ChatGPT does its magic because we've given it a prompt, we've told it what the question is, we've told what the answers are, we've instructed it to only answer the question from the data, and it will then take that and create a perfectly worded answer here as its next little chat bubble that answers the user's question specifically based on the question and the content that we provided. Is that making sense?
Stupid question. So
Yeah.
the flow you're outlining here is, this is in essence what companies like Chatbase or Retune doing now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, that's right. I'm just going into the weeds to
Got it.
understand
Yeah.
what sits under this for two reasons. We're going to build a chatbot here, and that's great. You know, everyone will have a chatbot on their website. There are WYSIWYG no-code tools. We're going to go and play with one. But the reason for diving into this conceptually is that I want everyone in the room to understand how this works under the guts, so that you can go upstream and go, hey, we're going to build our own thing that uses that technique. You know, we're going to offer a SaaS platform that does this, or we're going to offer a special, because at the end of the day, that's the kind of thing that Springboards and these other businesses, this is a fundamental building block for what they actually do. Yeah, maybe talk about Humaneer that you're working with. Kim's unfortunately not here, but one of our new founders, actually, Tubbs, you can talk about Humaneer. Give us 10 seconds on Humaneer and how this kind of
It's a rapidly evolving platform, as you would know. Humaneer, in essence, is the guys are building a platform to make HR easier. So they're kind of democratizing everything you might need in an HR role anywhere in the world to untap information, resources, community that big global companies might have access to, but you as a smaller business may not. The app content, or what they're calling machine accelerated knowledge, or MAC, is going to be their assistant, which is in essence going to be doing exactly what you're saying, Chris, here, where they're going to be feeding it with content. So it will be ring fenced with the latest legislation, which may change, and they don't want to provide information that might wig out or hallucinate and give someone misinformation on a very important topic. So, but the context of that is that it will make anybody in HR's life a lot more simple and easy.
Yeah, so, if you think about the founders of that company, both sort of senior HR execs, their insight was that HR doesn't have HR. We're going to build a community, but a key part of that community is we're going to build effectively a RAG system which allows that HR community to go and ask questions of this AI, like the sorts of things that you might call an HR lawyer up about. Because to go and read the full statute of employment law on thing X or Y or Z is a massively exhaustive process. Whereas using what I just described here, the records that are going in there are the statutes. So we're literally going to the department of whatever it is, grabbing the latest legislation, sticking it in here, asking questions of it, and this is citing from the actual legislation and giving us an answer of that, as opposed to just like making up some stuff in its response. Does that make sense? So that concept, there's actually a lot of low-hanging fruit there to create businesses around specific areas that typically there was like massive friction to get access to the information. It was what you call gate kept. There was someone who sort of had access to the information and was charging you a toll. I hope there are no HR lawyers in the room, but effectively HR lawyers gated access to all the HR legislation and an ability to parse it and give you advice and so forth. This is a sort of an approach to doing that differently. Okay.
Sorry, Chris, just before you move on. You might have already covered this when you were talking about the retrieval part of things. So when you put in this content into your RAG system, is it only this content that your prompts will be like retrieving from at that stage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how good does that content have to be? So
It's garbage in, garbage out.
okay, so if you, let's say like Atlassian, like you had, all of your apps there or all of your content in Atlassian for sort of an internal you know, database or agent. I mean, it's not necessarily groomed content. There's a lot of information in there. I mean, is it going to be able to use that, or is that going to be too ad hoc?
I mean, I would say it's case by case, and I think some of the user-generated stuff is probably more challenging. Ian's doing some stuff with user-generated, but just share with us your use case, because I think that's quite a fascinating use case.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple, and it's garbage in, garbage out, and high quality content that's a specific source, not a general kind of web crawl or anything like that. We're only pointing to these things that we know and trust, and then we're going to use that in the answer and the response and tell the model specifically, hey, don't ever guess anything, don't ever respond outside of the documents that have been returned. I mean, you want to be working with high quality content. Otherwise, there's no difference to just using GPT.
Which was trained on those forums and blah, 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 blah anyway. So we're saying like that's not reliable enough for us to just set and forget a customer service bot on our website. We can't rely on that. So in your case, it would be obviously NDIS regulations, legislation, and stuff like that. That's bona fide, it's legit. One can rely on it. It's up to date.
Because that part of it's easy when you've got like government regulation or legislation. It's the part then that you come back, if we're talking about customers using it, like that internal operating procedures that you have in place, that might have been written by different people, definitely written by different people. It's not, things that were written 2 years ago are going to be written differently today.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to solve that problem, but I think what it does is it behooves us to make sure that we are, for example, like what I do now for the hub is I kind of like keep a master document that if anything crops up, I'll go and add to that because I just know that now feeds in and trains my bot the whole time. So it's kind of like manage the content once and get all the downstream benefits from it. And I'll dive in and show this in a second. So, let's just quickly ask this thing just to demonstrate, what I think is getting to be a pretty useful level of reliability. So how does the hub work? I did tell it to be friendly. What a fantastic question. Peregian Digital Hub, like a finely tuned operating system, underpins technology innovation expertise. Here's a quick rundown. Provide an ideal working environment, network events, digital skills programs. Could you let me know what you're inquiring about? Because that was a very broad question. Is it about memberships? Is it about booking our facilities? Is it about our skills program? Can I do a day of co-work, which is a regular issue that we have to answer? Honestly, our team over the years has had to answer this question in quite a challenging way over and over and over. And it's nice to kind of now like outsource this to the bot. We're more like a dedicated server for technology companies rather than a hot desk co-working space. We don't offer drop-in or casual co-working options. Our space is curated specifically for members who are actively building tech businesses. If you have a tech business and are curious about becoming a member, I'd be more than happy to provide you with information about that. Could you tell me a bit more about what you do? This would help us understand. So I'm going to say, I have an HR law firm, God forbid. It'll be kind, it'll be gentle, but hopefully it'll be correct. Okay, so it's not saying, no, you don't qualify, blah, 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 blah. It's like, don't piss them off. There may be an HR law firm that is actually like an HR software law firm or something like that. I wouldn't want to like say, sorry, the hub's not for you. So you can see it, and I'll show you the prompting in a second about the sort of how we've coached the thing and how we want it to behave. But it's asking for it's asking for some information. So I'll say, you know, my name is Bob Dole. And my email is and what I'm going to show you is there's quite a cool thing about this platform is that it's able to parse that information into structured information and then do things like use a tool to update update a Google spreadsheet or update a CRM system or whatever it might be. So thank you for that information, Bob. It's quite impressive that you're harnessing technology with your HR law firm. Now with that cyber legal crossover, you might want to have a look at our build page. So one of the things that I've told it is, I've said, you are a widget on our website, and one of the things you must do is wherever a question is relevant, point the person to the page on the website where the full information might be. So you can see here it said, why don't you take a look at our build page? Click on the build page, and here's our build page with information about memberships and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like the basic user experience. I've made it large because I left my glasses at home. It's not normally as difficult to navigate that whole thing, but you get the concept. And what I wanted to do was sort of use the rest of the session, sort of walk you through how to use the platform that we're using that does this. There are multiple platforms that do this these days, and what it does is it's going to allow you with no code and within half an hour to sort of build something, but also to understand how these things work, how this fits into the whole question, how the prompt engineering fits into the whole question, how you might embed this on the website very, very easily, and so on. So does that sound like a next step? Right. So if you go to a website called chatbotkit.com, they've got a pretty generous starting free thing, so you're not going to have to put credit card details or anything like that. So if you click on create new, there should be a sign in or sign up button there. And then my advice is just sign in with your burner Gmail or Google account, just like literally SSO. Always have an extra Gmail account that I use for testing all this stuff, because these days everyone's got Google SSO. You just literally click sign in with Google, boom, and you're in. So yeah. So sign in, and then we're going to walk through kind of step by step.
Chris, did you try a few different ones, a few different tools like this?
Yeah, Matt, I've literally tested most of them and been using them for a while. This is the second one that I've had on the Hub website. And this one's far more economical, far more feature rich, and far more extensible than the one I was using before, which is called Chatbase. If you'd come to a previous talk of mine, I said, hey, everyone test out Chatbase. The key thing that Chatbase got stingy with was they wouldn't give you access to GPT-4 without paying like $100 a month. I was just like, that's crazy. Whereas these guys, you get access to the best models and it's $20 a month. And you can build multiple bots, and it's very generous pricing model that they have. Okay, everyone logged in? All right, so we're going to go to bots. And then create bot. And you should end up at a page that looks a bit like this. The bot configuration steps. Give it a name. I just called mine Hub CS, as in customer service agent. And description, you know, this is a customer service bot for whatever you want it to be.
Hang on, Chris, on that.
So the first thing is the backstory, and the backstory I actually think is quite aptly named. Like, what's the backstory for this bot? They just give you a generic version there, but I'm going to show you the hub version of the backstory. So. Sort of get a sense of how I've gone about doing this, where, you know, I've given it its own context, that it understands what it is. You know, you're a highly trained support agent for the Peregian Digital Hub. The hub's owned and operated by the Noosa Shire Council. It's based in Peregian Beach, beautiful beachside village in the Noosa Shire. I wanted to understand that context because it's going to be much better able to help end users if it sort of understands its own context better. I know this sounds very weird talking about it like it's a human, but at a practical level, the better the context you give the thing, the better it's gonna do. I actually tell it that it's embedded as a chatbot widget on the hub's website, because then it knows, it conceptually can reason that if it's on the website, when it recommends a link or whatever it is, that someone will click on the link and go to the web page. So it's not obvious in the basic instructions unless you tell it that. The very important bit here is you have access to a comprehensive data set about the hub, and you answer only from the given data set. When asked for information about the hub, think step by step about what to query from the data set so that you get the correct content for your answers. If the answer is not included in the data set, say exactly, I'm not sure about that. Please check with my human colleagues. Refuse to answer any questions not about the data set. You know, people will come to these things and they'll try and jailbreak them, and they'll try and, you know.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. And look, I'm not making the case that this is all solved. You know, I'm just making the case that we need to start experimenting and start playing with this stuff. And it's at a point now where I think it's reasonable to get it on the website and start using it. And then I'm actually just going to log in with my other account, because now I've got you guys logged in, I'm going to show you the actual one that I built, just so you can see how it works under the covers. So the backstory is, if you like, the master prompt. While we're on the topic, friends don't let friends use ChatGPT without custom instructions. So every opportunity I get, I remind people that there is this feature in ChatGPT which you have to use if you're not using it. So you click down bottom left and you go to customize ChatGPT, and in customize ChatGPT, I'm not going to ask who is or isn't doing this because I don't want to embarrass you. But you have to use this. So the backstory that we're writing for our chatbot, customer service chatbot, this is the backstory for you, for ChatGPT to understand you. So when you ask it questions, it's not just like, it understands you, your business, your background, what your objectives are, etc. And then its answers are so much better than if you're just using sort of normal ChatGPT that has no idea about you. So you'll see in customized instructions or customized ChatGPT, the custom instructions are, you know, what do you want it to know about you to provide better responses? And then how do you want it to behave, or how do you want it to respond? So anyway, that's just a small tip. You must use that. So, yeah. Let's go back to creating our bot. Sorry, our bot's here. There's my Hub GPT. And here's my backstory as we were just going through before. Would it be useful to put these instructions in the doc, and you guys can copy and paste and use as you like?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just stick it in that Google Doc. It's a big bit. So I'll just make these notes in the doc. You've all got access to it. So if you wanted to use any of the stuff, you could. So that's the backstory. important rules. You do not have authority to decide whether a user qualifies for membership, office lease, or usage of the facilities. Because you see these jailbreak things where people go to the airline thing, or they go to like a car thing, and the next thing they're making a claim to the competition ombudsman that the chatbot said that they could have a free car or whatever it might be. So, you know, we're at that stage. So anyway, you're not allowed to tell someone that they can have a free office lease for 10 years or something like that. You could just imagine the complaints to council. The Hub chatbot told us that we could have we could rent the whole thing for a year for free. And then and then once you've got your backstory in there, the next step is the data set. And everything we talked about before, everything we talked about on there this is where the rubber hits the road. We've given it the backstory, but now we really need to give it the data that it's going to be answering questions from. And I quite like the way these guys have done this. One can either just import like a big document, or one can sort of create the records. I, for what it's worth, have a sort of master document that I've been keeping where I where it looks like code, but it's not really code. Just think of this as normal sort of text. But this is sort of where I've been maintaining my sort of master document for my customer service agent. And I do little things in this, like I say, this is called JSON. It's basically just a simple way of creating structured information. But one could do this in a spreadsheet and export it as a CSV. There's many different ways you could do this. At some stage, I'll do a session on how to use JSON. But you can see I've tried to kind of create some structured information here that just makes the bot's life a little bit easier. So this particular section, this record, I've said is, it's useful for questions about this. Here's the actual content, which is the bit you're going to worry about. And if there are any relevant links, I'll sort of make a note of some relevant links that it can use when it answers the question. The background and rationale for the hub, I've got this whole spiel I'm not going to take you through, but these are in effect the records. And once you've created your data set, so let's go to this data set, you'll see that you have the opportunity to create records down here. So if I click on create record, is everyone at this point? We all created a data set. So basically you have a blank data set right now, and we need to add records to the data set. So if we click on create record, there's basically just a text box there, where what I did was I just copied and pasted each of the records that I wanted to provide. One could start by just going to your own websites, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, and create, say, your first 5 records or something like that as a way of getting started. You can also import. So if you click on import, you've got 2 options there. It can import from a website. So please enter the URL of the web page you would like me to import as a data set. Note that only the text content of the web page will be imported, not any images or multimedia. So that makes it quick and easy if you want to experiment. You literally just, it doesn't even have to be your own website if you want to play with this. Just point it to some other website, let it grab the content, and then start asking questions about it. So upload a file, or give it a URL, and it's going to import that as a record into the data set. So just a quick sort of note on how the thing is structured. So you have a data set, and the data set consists of records. So records are a child of data set, if that makes sense. So one data set, let's say a Hub customer service data set, will have lots of records in that data set. Each one might be about a separate thing. A simple way to think about it is each record might be the content from a different page on your website would go into a record. Does that make sense? So I've got to say, like, this platform, the amount of work that I have put into this thing is just staggering. It's a small team in London. Just the level of documentation, the examples they provide, etc. It's one of the best I've used. And they've got a very helpful chatbot too, obviously, as you would expect. But you'll see at the bottom of every single one of these things, you've got frequently asked questions. I think it's a pretty good design pattern.
Chris, you're back at
Sorry. Sorry, this is where I was. So creating a record, you'll see at the bottom, they've got FAQs pretty much across every single page here. So it really helps you and steps you through how to use this thing. So what is a record? How big can they be? How do I create a new record? Can I import a web page? ... Very, very helpful. And if you look at the navigation, they've kind of organized the navigation around each of these key things. We've got our backstory, we've got our data sets, we'll talk about skill sets in a moment, and then we've got the widget. And what is the widget? The widget is basically the thing